Okay, so my name is Jacob Southwood, and today we are going to be looking at what really went on during the Cassini Huygens Spacecraft launch and its mission to Saturn. I'm being joined today by Professor David Southwood, who was a magnetometer, am I pronouncing that right?
Correct.
A principal investigator on the project, so thank you for joining me today. So can I just ask, what was your involvement in the role? Because as we know, you were a magnetometer investigator, but what did that actually involve?
Well, it meant, yes, well, I actually had two roles, but let's start with the magnetometer principal investigator.
Mm.
Each of the main instruments on the spacecraft has to be built by somebody. Of course, you have a big team underneath you. There's there's a competition, well, Europe and the United States provide the magnetometer, and I won. And I had a team that built the spacecraft magnetometer. And a magnetometer, so I suppose it's obvious, measures magnetic fields.
Mm.
And so we got accepted to do that job, I think, in 1990. And the spacecraft actually was launched off to Saturn in 1997. So between 1990 and 1997, we had not only to build the magnetometer, but test it, because you have to be sure it works. Once it's on its way to Saturn, you can't go up there and fix it.
Mm.
You can send it, you can modify the way it works by sending radio signals to change, say, software on the instrument, but you can't actually take it out and take it back to the lab. So an awful lot of effort is associated with testing it to try and make sure that you understand how it works, what it's got to go through. And of course, you make certain parts of it redundant so that if one bit breaks, you've got another way to do it. But there's a limit to what you can do, because, of course, when you're launching something, even if it's on a great big rocket, you have to make it as light as possible. So there you are. So 1997 was when we launched. Mm-hmm. And we arrived at Saturn in 2004. So it took 7 years to get there. Mm. Of course, you use the instrument during the interplanetary flight just to make sure it's working, but also it can make measurements in the interplanetary environment that can be useful for other scientists. So we did make measurements, and in fact, we flew past, this sounds really bizarre, before we went to Saturn, we first went to Venus. Okay. Because you know is closer to the sun than we are. And what you do there is you go round Venus and use its gravity to speed you up. And then we came back to the Earth and used Earth's gravity to speed us up. And then if that wasn't quite enough, we went past Jupiter. We had a relatively close encounter with Jupiter, which also speeded us up, to finally arrive at Saturn. When you arrive at Saturn, of course, the key thing is to stop.
That would be ideal, yeah.
You've got to then have a great big engine that fires to slow you down enough to prevent you just whipping past Saturn and off into galactic space or whatever. You know, it's you really have to fire the engine, so you go very close to the planet, as close as you think you can safely go, and then fire the engine then, as that's the most efficient way to get into orbit. So that's in a nutshell how you get to Saturn on a spacecraft.
Oh, wow. So I'd just like to ask again, just what was the most major highlight for you personally?
Yeah, okay. Well, from a personal point of view, landing on time was pretty important. But from a very personal point of view, because I built the magnetometer, although the person in charge of it now was one of my old colleagues at Imperial College in London, my biggest satisfaction was the biggest surprise of the entire mission, I suppose, was the big American mothership kept going round in orbit around Saturn, visiting various moons. Saturn has 64 moons. There's a lot of them to visit. They went near what seemed a very insignificant moon called Enceladus, which is right near the outer edge of the rings. And Enceladus didn't seem terribly interesting, but we flew past it. And my instrument, the magnetometer, picked up a magnetic signal. It doesn't look that exciting. The magnetic field just sort of wiggles, and but its shape told those of us who know about magnetic fields of bodies there was something important being created by the moon in the space around it, and it was water. It turned out to be water because the moon Enceladus is made of ice. There must be a jet of water coming out of it, as water vapor, I suppose I should say, and a bit like a geyser. You know, I don't know, like Old Faithful in Yellowstone National Park in America. Now, I know about magnetometers and magnetic fields of things. So do my colleagues. Not everybody does. Maybe you don't know that much, but doesn't matter. Seeing is believing. My successor, Michelle Doherty at Imperial College, she persuaded, given this information we picked up from the magnetometer as we flew near Enceladus, she persuaded them to go back, to take the spacecraft back to Enceladus and take a picture from the dark side of Enceladus so that you've got the sunlight potentially lighting up the geyser. And hey presto, once that was done, there was water shooting out in a geyser. So Enceladus must have an ocean inside it. Its surface doesn't show any signs of anything but rock. But deep inside, there must be an ocean, and that is somehow being heated. And just like a geyser, like you have in America or in New Zealand, that was going on. If there's an ocean, there could be life. Not exactly fishes, but, you know, water, salty water in this case, is a perfect place to, if you like, cook life. And so that's pure imagination. I mean, I'm just saying there's an ocean there. It could be where life is evolving. If you cast your mind back, of course, you know very well, life on Earth evolved in the oceans before it evolved on the surface, on the dry surface. So that, I have to say, I think everyone would admit is the most important, mind-boggling discovery from Cassini Huygens overall. Okay?
Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Yeah,
So what I hope is that, from this interview, we could have encouraged the younger generation to be, taking a bigger interest in the various sciences after, watching this interview.
that's
So,
absolutely fine, Jacob.
so
I'm very, very glad to collaborate with you. You
well,
take care,
thank you. You too.
and it's been a pleasure.
Thank you
Right.
very much.
Bye
Right.
bye.